Hello and welcome back to the As Told by Bold podcast. This is your host, the certified, bona fide, and indubitably qualified to bring you satisfaction and a whole lot of action, Stasea. In today's podcast, we will touch on belonging and self-doubt that many transfer students face. With me today, I have Roxanne, an associate family and marriage therapist, along with Linda, a transfer graduate student. To begin, we will answer the question, what does belonging mean to you and why is it important? Let's jump in.
So belonging means that, for me, a place where I feel comfortable being. I feel like also a part of belonging is usually associated with an identity. So for me, when I transferred, I was looking for any grad student that was like me. I live in the dorms, and there's a lot of incoming freshmen and young people, and I was just struggling. I was trying to find anybody. So it was really important for me in that time because I wanted somebody that had similarities with me. But then also, then I realized that maybe somebody that's not a grad student has similarities with me too. And that took me time, but belonging is just very important when you're transferring in and really in life.
Yeah. I'd agree with Linda, and she actually brings up a really good point as far as identifying, being able to find somebody you feel comfortable with or you can relate with. Mm-hmm. Because really, we are social creatures, right? We look to bond with people, to connect and just feel like we're accepted in a group, or not necessarily like a big group, but just feeling like we belong somewhere. Mm-hmm. For you, psychology or humanities studies students, you guys might recognize Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where it talks about, being able to meet parts of that pyramid, require meeting certain needs or specific needs within that pyramid. And belongingness is one of those things. Belongingness is where we connect and we find our people, our group, just being able to build that strength in numbers concept. So
that's so true too.
Yeah.
As a transfer student, belonging was a challenge for me as well. Especially because I didn't even know what that meant. Because, again, like, exploring the sense of self, you kind of have to, learn more about... I had to learn more about myself in order to know, where I even belonged, which is interesting. But I had to recognize that in order for... it was almost like a series of events that led me to my sense of belonging. First, what I had to do was I had to be authentic to myself. But before I could even be authentic, I had to be vulnerable. And that can be hard.
True. Yeah.
It's very hard because it's scary, because once you're vulnerable, you have the potential to be hurt.
Right.
And I think that is a very real thing. And so I found people that I already had in my life or that I had met that I felt connected to, that I was able to be vulnerable. And share my life experiences, and they then, shared with me. And after I was able to hone into being vulnerable, I was then able to be authentic and be true to who I was and express myself and okay, this is what I stand for, this is what I agree with, these are my values, this is who I am, this is my whole process of self-exploring. And then after the period of authenticity, I hit a roadblock. Because being a people pleaser that I am, I want everyone to like me. And the reality is, not everybody's going to like you.
Right.
Especially when you're authentic.
Right.
Yes.
And so I did have to deal with that and recognize that that is the part of life. We don't get taught, I didn't feel like I got told that growing up.
Mm-hmm. I don't think any of us did, really.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Especially as women, because we're taught to be nurturing and caring
and
nice.
Self-aware.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes. Thank you.
Selfless.
Thank you. Agreed. So in order to do that, it took a process, and I think the biggest advice that I could give personally from my experience is to trust that process, but also acknowledging that there is a process to go through.
That's true. And then it all ties back in with self-exploration,
exactly.
right? like being able to know who you are and being able, like you said, going back to being vulnerable and accepting that part of yourself, because once you've done that, then you'll find where you belong, where people actually accept you.
Next, Roxanne, Linda, and I will explore self-doubt as a transfer student. The question we will respond to is, how do you recognize self-doubt, and where do you start once you recognize it?
So when I think of self-doubt, I think about fear. Times where I was unsure of myself, it was more of being scared of the unknown. How do I go in? Well, our focus here is transferring. I had a lot of experiences with that, and how do I make friends? How do I find resources that I need? So when I think about self-doubt, I think about the anxiety or fear around it. And when I recognize it, I think about, okay, why am I feeling like this? So I just acknowledge my feelings and then think about how can I fix this, or maybe get myself out of that fear and doubt.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. Because a big part of what you said comes from recognizing that feeling, right? Mm-hmm. Recognizing that fear or something. What's that feeling that's holding me back, right? Mm-hmm. You know, and so, and it's normal, you know, it serves a function, absolutely, because biologically, we're creatures where we respond to stress or we respond to situations that look like a threat. Mm-hmm. But sometimes those threats are not real threats, you know, just you know, it's that perception. Mm-hmm. So recognizing that doubt or that fear is there is really important. And I was actually going to say that that's a really important part in identifying self-doubt, is recognizing that automatic negative perception of a situation or of yourself. Mm-hmm. And then recognizing when there's a feeling of insecurity, which we all have, and just working on that and working on how to reassure yourself in a situation. And I mean, kind of works into the resilience that we're talking about. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, as a transfer student personally, you know, self-doubt was definitely a part of my experience. And I definitely do agree with both of you. Like, acknowledging that it's there had allowed me to move forward. Because being in that self-doubt, I kind of felt like I was swimming in it and not really having anything to do, but acknowledging that it was there, it gave me something to do. Because I then had to, like, look within myself and recognize, is this a real threat? Is this something that is actually present and real at this time? Am I safe? And I had to recognize, yes, I am safe. Yes, I am okay in this space. It is new. It's very different from being back home. And I had to recognize that. And I had, instead of looking at it as a challenge or an issue, I had to instead change my perspective to see it as an opportunity to explore myself.
Mm-hmm. So just curious, where is home for you?
Lancaster, California, born and raised. In the boonies.
The boonies?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a nice drive though, right?
It's a lovely drive. Yeah. There's a lot of dirt. We made a lot of mud pies growing up. It was great with our one mall, our one freeway.
I never realized that.
Yeah. So the second part of the question is, where do you start once you recognize this self-doubt? I feel like it's kind of going back to the self-care. Mm-hmm. Like taking care of myself, I think, is a part that I do personally to recognize it and, like, giving myself that space to explore myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to emphasize that part of it, exploring who you are, things that, you know, what you're interested in, mm-hmm. things that you know that you're strong in, things that you know you need to work on a little bit more. Being able to explore those parts of yourselves or where you can start. And I actually thought of a list of questions that, you know, you can start to ask yourself, and these are really useful in journaling too.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's, you know, you want to ask yourself, what are my strengths? What are my areas of improvement? What are my healthy coping skills when things don't go as expected? What are the beliefs I hold about myself? If they're negative, how can I change them so they're more positive, productive, and accurate or realistic? What is important to you? And that goes into values, right? And it's not necessarily what others think should be important to you. What is truly important to you? What kind of person, student, partner, friend, parent do you want to be in your relationships or your community? So these are just really good ways of reflecting on how can I, who am I really?
Thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed listening to our podcast about belonging and self-doubt. We will catch you next time on As Told by Bold, a mini-series.